should the listeners begin to buy into Nelson?
Well, I understand why they're hesitant. I'll say that because we've seen the first two seasons. But all you can go on is how he's performed in off-season work and through training camp. And to this point, he's been a much, much improved player.
What are some of the things you see that make you feel that way? Like, to give some layers and context to it, what are some of the things you guys are seeing there that make you say, I would buy into him?
Well, he's a great route runner. He's able to get consistent separation. He's caught the football consistently, not Alshon Jeffrey-like, but certainly above where he was in the prior two seasons. And Frank Reich talked about it today. It's been his consistency from day to day. But it doesn't count now. I mean, that's the reality of it all. I think everyone knows Nelson has talent. He was a first-round pick for a reason. You can argue the Eagles kind of overreached to select him where they did, but either way, he was going to be a late first-round or an early second-round pick. So there's significant talent there, and it's always been a mental hurdle with him. And sort of when he does something wrong, it starts to snowball. The coaches always talk about with cornerbacks, you have to have a short memory. In the case of Nelson Agholor, he's had a very long memory, and he lets mistakes bother him, and then all of a sudden he starts to get the yips, and they start to grow, and we'll see if he's overcome that. You're not going to be able to see that until the regular season starts, but throughout practices in the off season and in training camp, he's been very, very good. And I would argue he's been one of the Eagles' three best receivers. He's probably, Jordan was out for most of the spring. And Torrey Smith has flashed at times, but other than Alshon Jeffrey, I'm going to say it. He's been the Eagles' second best receiver throughout the spring and summer.
I think the hard part for fans, John, is the mental aspect. Like, people will say, that guy's lazy. It's hard for us to just say all of a sudden he's not lazy, or he's got mental lapses, or he's not focused, and all of a sudden that changes. That's hard for people to accept sometimes. There are exceptions. There is that one guy who – he was a lazy ass his whole life, and then all of a sudden you were like, man, this guy's really turned it around. He's a hard worker all of a sudden. That's why it's hard for people to accept Agholor. But is that the story? That here's a guy who had mental issues in terms of losing focus, but maybe he's overcome them?
Yeah, and I think they're right to be cautious about it, as I said, because I think it's easier to do when there's only a few people there. And even – in the off season, it's only media people. Maybe there's 20 or 30 people at practice. And even today, when it's open to season ticket holders, there's maybe a couple hundred people there. So that's a lot different than 70,000 people in an NFL stadium on national television. And in the past, the stage has seemed a little bit too big for Nelson Agholor. I can't say he's overcome that hurdle yet. All I can say is that he looks like a good football player in practice.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com with us here. You mentioned that he might be the second or third guy. Is someone does that put someone else on the bubble?
No, when I say he's been the second guy, I think he's been the second best receiver throughout the offseason.
Well, I'm not saying on the depth chart. I'm not saying on the depth chart. I'm just saying because of his play, does that have someone on alert, or does that make them say we got to rethink how many receivers we're going to keep?
I don't think so, because he was always going to be the fourth guy, and I think he's still the fourth guy. I think the mentality of this team is they like the structure they've set up, and that's going to be Torrey Smith as the deep threat, and Jordan Matthews as the slot guy, and Alshon Jeffrey obviously is your wide receiver one. So those are the three guys, and he'll mix in from there. But anytime you play 11 personnel like the Eagles do the majority of the time, and that means you have three receivers on the field, he's going to have opportunities to mix in. And if he keeps carrying over into the regular season, at some point he's going to overtake someone, whether it's Torrey Smith, most likely, because he's playing too well and he's got too much talent. But I don't think that's going to happen by week 1.
You answered that a little bit there, John, and I did want to ask you about Torrey Smith because I've seen some scenarios from other people out there, and Mike and I discussed it earlier in the program. Is there a possibility that Torrey Smith could be this year's Ruben Randall, signed to a deal but then out before training camp's even over, or do you think Torrey Smith makes this football team?
No, I think he makes the team. I think the Eagles like him. By no, one is not mutually exclusive to the other. He's actually performed pretty well himself. That's just how well Nelson has performed. So it's not like he's done a bad job, or if he's not performing up to what they thought he was going to. I think he's given them exactly what they expected, and they're happy with Torrey Smith. But I think there's a ceiling there. And I think if you look at Nelson's skill set and his ability to play inside, his ability to play outside, he's probably the best route runner on this team. I think it's higher. And that shouldn't surprise anyone because he is a former first-round pick. So if he can get over the mental hurdle, and that's a big if, that's a very big if, because he's been a bad football player through 2 seasons. There's no shading that. There's no debating it. He's been bad, not below average, flat out bad. But if he gets over the mental hurdles, at some point you're going to have to say, you know what, he's a better football player, and put him on the field. But I think we're still a ways away from that.
How about Alshon Jeffrey as we visit with John McMullen here? What kind of sense do you have about what's keeping him out? Because initially they had said it was just a normal maintenance day, a health day, we're going to keep him out. But now it's been a couple of days there. Do you have a sense of what's keeping him out or how long he'll be out?
Yeah, it's a shoulder injury. It's not serious. He's out there on the field every day in shorts and his jersey, sort of working out on his own. So it's abundantly clear it's nothing serious. That's what training camp has become in the modern day NFL. If you have a significant player that has any kind of tweak anywhere in his body, you're going to rest him because the goal is to get to week 1 as healthy as possible. So it's not really all that important for Alshon Jeffrey to be out there every single day if he's not 100%. So I think that's how the Eagles are approaching it, and I think that's wise.
John, there's so many young and inexperienced cornerbacks on this team. I know that Frank Reich was asked today, can he get a fair assessment of how the wideouts are coming along because of the caliber of the talent that they're going up against at corner?
Yeah, I struggle with that every day because the Eagles look like they have a significantly improved wide receiver corps. I mean, by leaps and bounds from where it was last season, and you start to question, well, are they really that good, or is it the fact that the cornerbacks are so bad? And, the Eagles brought in Corey Graham this afternoon, 11-year veteran guy who was with Jim Schwartz in Buffalo in 2014. He's a cornerback and a safety. He's 32 years old. He played cornerback earlier in his career, switched to safety in recent years. Eagles announced him as a safety, but I wouldn't be surprised if they tried him at cornerback because the evidence is mounting. I mean, this is not a good wide receiver group, and it's clear the Eagles are looking to outside the organization, and Corey Graham is sort of the first domino to fall.
Hey, John, Wendell Smallwood, too. I've been hearing good things about him. He admitted he was out of shape, and, it seems that he's come in much better shape. Number one, do you see that as well? And number two, is he opening up the team's eye a little bit?
Well, he's been really impressive this week in the 2 practices and live periods because he's a very physical runner. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he runs in a physical fashion, and that's where running backs show up. in the fact that you have live tackling periods, and you have so few of them in today's NFL. It's really tough to gauge, and he's a guy who looks more impressive when you have to tackle him than when you don't have to tackle him. Because, when you're going through regular practice, a lot of times the coaches blow the whistle. A defensive tackle might get some penetration. They touch the running back, the play's over. But in real football, you might get that penetration, but you might not be able to tackle the running back. And he might break it and turn it into a big gain. And Smallwood's been very, very effective. As LeGarrette Blount's been out all week with a family issue, he's been the starting running back, and he's been effective.
So in the event that Blount was injured or something was wrong with him, obviously he's been out of just practice, not because of injury, you think Smallwood would be the guy? Would they turn to him? He's the next guy on the depth chart? Or last year it seemed that they went to Sproles?
Yeah, I think, it's tough to say because they did use Sproles a lot last year, and you have that mentality that he might retire. So you don't have to be as cautious. It's his last year of the deal here. So you don't have to be as worried about those health concerns and maybe making sure he lasts. You can sort of use him as much as you can. So I can't say they wouldn't go to Darren Sproles because they've done it in the past, but it certainly seems the way they're working training camp is that LeGarrette and Wendell are sort of the first and second down backs. Wendell backs up LeGarrette, and then as far as the third down backs, it's Sproles and Pumphrey. Pumphrey's been out as well with a hamstring injury. So it certainly seems like they're working it that way in training camp. And I would think if LeGarrette is unable to play, I think Wendell Smallwood would be the starting running back.
John McMullen with us. So, John, if Pumphrey's been out with an injury and LeGarrette Blount out with family reasons, what about the local kid, Corey Clement? What's his chances of making any impact on this football team?
Well, I think he's a practice squad guy. I think, that's sort of his floor. I think he's certainly going to be around. The Eagles like him. I don't know if the numbers are going to be there for the 53-man roster for him unless there's an injury somewhere through the preseason. Then he could certainly be in the equation. But the Eagles told him to lose a little weight over the little lull between minicamp and training camp. He did. He looks a little bit quicker. And without Blount, he's getting a lot of reps with the second team. Formed well also in the live periods and showing his explosiveness and physicalness because he's a big back, even losing weight. That's his strength. It's not, he's not the 4-4 guy that's going to run away from people. He's a guy who's going to run over people, and he's generally shown that.
I know that Frank Reich was asked about how much stock he puts into these live hitting days versus some of the other days. How much stock do you put into that as well, John? I mean, is the live hitting periods really where you see what the guy can do as opposed to the other practice sessions?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said at certain positions, I think you can gauge receivers and cornerbacks without live hitting, but you can't gauge the running backs. You can't gauge the offensive line and defensive line, and even linebackers in run support without live periods. I mean, it's difficult. If you don't have pads on and you're not hitting me, I mean, it's one of the reasons people have all over this league, and I'm not talking about fans, I'm talking about coaches and scouts, have decried offensive line plays because there are so few live periods, and young players don't get a chance to hit and get used to pass rushers and get used to the physicalness of the position as a whole. So for certain positions, it's very important. And for other positions, you could probably do without it. It's a tough balancing act because, as I said, the biggest point of all is you want to get to week one as healthy as possible.
Hey, a couple receivers, Mac Hollins and Marcus Johnson, a guy you wrote about the other day. Hollins is interesting because many people thought he'd make an impact as a special teams player, but as much as Agholor's been opening eyes, has either of these two guys put their name in the hat?
Yeah, they both have. Mac Hollins is, he's already a part of this team because of his special teams acumen and his ceiling as sort of a prospect. He's going to be here. But Marcus Johnson is sort of that bubble guy that's played so well. He's getting first-team reps. And, Jimmy Kempski did a poll of all the media people at practice today. He asked us to give one player that has sort of exceeded expectations, one player that has sort of gone downhill. And I think Marcus Johnson, he was first. I think he got 14 of the 30 votes. So, he's been the one guy who has stood out consistently that maybe a lot of people don't know about who he was or where he was as a prospect. He's been tremendous. And if the final cuts were today, there's no question he would be on this team.
Does that bounce somebody, or does that just make them add another receiver?
Well, I think he would be the sixth receiver, and I think it kind of bounces Shelton Gibson, but to the practice squad.
Has he come around, Gibson?
No, he's been a little bit better than he was in sort of the off-season work. I think he's starting to settle down, but he's still on the third team. And as I said, you have a guy like Marcus who's taking first-team reps without Alshon Jeffrey there. It kind of tells you he's kind of lapped him to this point. So it's going to be difficult for him. And that's not the worst thing in the world. Sometimes it's good as a young player to have a redshirt season, so to speak, and be stuck on whether it's injured reserve or the practice squad and sort of come back the next season. That's what the Eagles think Alex McAllister's ready to do. They stashed him on IR, and they think without Marcus Smith, he might make the 53-man roster.
John McMullen with us. Now, John, since there was live hitting today, and you mentioned earlier that there's certain positions where you can tell when the pad's on and other positions where it doesn't really necessarily dictate needing those pads and the hitting. But offensive line, I think, would be one of them. Obviously, Isaac Seumalo has now been penciled in as a starter. How has he looked in that starting role, and what are the comments coming out about Isaac Seumalo at left guard?
I think everybody's excited because they see his ability as a prospect. It's not necessarily there right now, and I always say today probably Alan Barber is a better player, but maybe 6 weeks into the season that's not the case, and certainly in 2 or 3 years that's not going to be the case. So he's a really athletic guy. He's really smart. So there's no reason to think Isaac Seumalo is going to fail, especially when you consider he's playing in between two veteran guys like Jason Peters and Jason Kelsey. So I think the Eagles are excited about their offensive line, and they should be. We've talked about it dating back to the offseason. It's one of the best in pro football.
John, real quick, Hall of Fame game is tonight. We were debating before you came on. I know we probably hit on this way back when the Hall of Fame class was announced, but are you a yay Kurt Warner or a nay Kurt Warner?
I have always been a nay on Kurt Warner, mainly for longevity reasons, and I think that's a part of it. Obviously, at his at the height of his skills, he played at a Hall of Fame level. I just don't think he did it for a long enough period of time. And there was that lull between when he was with the Rams and when he went out to Arizona where it was really bad. So I don't think he's a Hall of Fame player. But one thing about the Hall of Fame you can guarantee is they're going to put in a quarterback every year. And basically he was the only option this year.
Yeah, we were saying it sounds like, I mean, there's a 5 or 6 season stretch there where he had no business being in the conversation, and then you have 4 really, really good ones. It sounds like his story pushed him over the top.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. There's so many guys vote for different reasons, and I think that's one of the problems is the lack of consistency. And I think there's some voters who take it very seriously and do the research and try to rate guys in their particular generations. And there's other guys who can fall for that story, as you put it, Mike, or fall for a fun narrative, and maybe it's not a Hall of Fame player, but he certainly, as I said, at his apex he was a Hall of Fame level player. I just don't think that apex was long enough to get into Canton. It's not the Hall of Fame of very good. It's supposed to be the best that ever lived, and I just don't put Kurt Warner in that category.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com for more on the NFL. FanRag Sports NFL, of course, at JF McMullen on Twitter. And you can check out all of the Eagles training camp coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.
All right, there's
Take care,
John.
John.
He's back tomorrow with